Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to Game Time. This is Super089 and today we're taking a look at Guild Wars 2. Now this isn't going to be a typical first impressions or a gameplay video. I already have one of those. I recorded one for Guild Wars 2 way back during the first beta weekend. And well, yeah, I know it's beta. A lot of what I would have touched on in a first impressions video hasn't really changed that much in terms of from beta to release, other than maybe some bugs and glitches. And I'm not even in performance issues. I know I mentioned performance issues, but as far as bugs and glitches go, I never ran into too many. So this video is actually going to be me discussing with you guys why I don't think Guild Wars 2 is deserving of all the hype it's been getting here lately. And if you're a Guild Wars 2 fan and you're listening to this video, let me preface, of course, by saying that I don't totally hate Guild Wars 2. I actually have somewhat of a love-hate relationship with the game. Sometimes I really love the game, and other times I really hate it. I just don't see the point in it. And again, I'm not trying to hate on the game. It's a perfectly alright game. It's perfectly fine. It's okay, but I think there is a serious issue in terms of I think people have just hyped up this game way too much. I don't think it's going to end up being the second coming of Christ like it's always been, like it's being hyped up as. And I'm going to tell you why. Alright, well first off, let me begin just giving you some background about my interest with Guild Wars 2. I played the original Guild Wars when it first came out. I played it for a couple of months in the summer. I believe it was in between my playing two MMORPGs. I had just finished up playing EverQuest 2, the very first time I ever played EverQuest 2, and so I was kind of in between games. I picked up Guild Wars 2, leveled up a character from 1 to 20, which was the level cap at the time, in about a couple of months. Now, in 2004, 2005, whenever Guild Wars 1 was released, leveling up a character in 2 months, or even or a month, or even 2 months, was just considered extremely fast. I mean, if you could do that in a game, you almost wouldn't even consider it a true MMO. And of course, coupled with the fact that every area outside of a town was instanced, and there wasn't any sort of an in-game grind. There wasn't raiding. It was just kind of PvP or finishing your story. Players didn't have a whole lot of reason to continue playing once they hit the level cap, and so it was sort of a for most people, now granted there were a ton of people that played Guild Wars 2 for a number of years, most people, I believe, and I think you can see this judging by if you played Guild Wars 2 back in the day when it first released, and then you were to log in and play Guild Wars, or I mean Guild Wars 1 back in the day when it first released, and then you were to log in and play Guild Wars 1 today, I think you would see a tremendous difference in population. And also keep in mind that Guild Wars 1 actually only has one server. So, what we're talking about here is again how I think for most people Guild Wars 1, which by the way ArenaNet never considered it an MMO. They never said Guild Wars 1 was an MMO. They always said it was a, I believe, cooperative online role-playing game, which I mean, you know, most people would say it kind of tickles the same buttons as an MMO would for an MMO fan. So I kind of consider it to be an MMO in a sense. Maybe I don't look at Guild Wars 1 in the same light that I looked at World of Warcraft, obviously. And I don't even look at Guild Wars 2 in that same light, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. But that's just kind of my impression. I've always thought of Guild Wars 2, or Guild Wars 1, I'm sorry, as being sort of a stopgap game to play in between MMOs when you just got bored with your game, or when you were looking for something new to play for a while, or waiting for something to come out. It wasn't a game that would capture your attention for months and years at a time. You simply would run out of meaningful, and I underline meaningful, things to do. Okay, well, Guild Wars 2 was announced in, I think, 2007, right? Right after or right before, I don't know, the release of Eye of the North, which, even though Guild Wars 2 had some, what you might consider expansion packs, they were mostly standalone games, kind of like City of Heroes and City of Villains. City of Villains being a standalone game in and of itself. You don't have to have City of Heroes to play City of Villains. And so they were kind of self-contained. Yes, if you had, say, if you were playing Guild Wars 2, you had the original game, which was the Prophecies campaign, and you bought Factions or Nightfall, you could take your Prophecies character into those expansion worlds and play through the expansion content. But again, it was kind of, it was all self-contained. In other words, you really wouldn't have too much of an advantage over another player if you had both games versus, you know, a player that only had one. And the only pure expansion pack for the game that was released was Eye of the North. And right after Eye of the North came out, or right before, again, I'm not really sure on the time frame, ArenaNet basically said, hey, this is the last paid content update you'll ever see for Guild Wars. We are working on Guild Wars 2. And years went by, and during this whole period of time, Guild Wars 1 kind of faded completely into obscurity. I mean, yes, you had Guild Wars 1 maintained a sizable population, and to this day it maintains a sizable population, but it had a lot of dedicated players. I don't think Guild Wars 1 really gained a lot of new players in that time frame. And yes, it's an old game, but then again, look at World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft is almost 8 years old, and it still receives new players almost on a daily basis. Now, Guild Wars 1, on the other hand, had a huge amount of players to start off, and then as time went on and there were less and less content updates, while the ArenaNet was working on Guild Wars 2, the game just kind of withered away, and only the die-hard players remain. Yes, today it's very difficult to break into Guild Wars 1 simply because you're not ever going to be surrounded with new players. Everyone in front of you, everyone's already in front of you and will remain in front of you and much more knowledgeable about the game, and it's going to be very hard to break in. But that's not really the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that Guild Wars 1 just kind of it's just kind of dead. I mean, yes, they had small content updates, but it was kind of dead for all those years that Guild Wars 2 was supposedly being developed. And also, Guild Wars 2, there was a long period of time where we never really heard any information out of ArenaNet about the game. In fact, Guild Wars 2 being announced in 2007, I don't think we even saw the first screenshot until maybe 2009, 2010. So, and I was very excited about the game. Yes, I was a bit of a Star Wars The Old Republic fanboy at the time, but I was a huge fan of Guild Wars 2. Or Guild Wars. So I thought, well, Guild Wars 2 will be great as well. And what struck me, though, is odd when visiting a lot of message boards and forums, where you had a huge contingent of players that seemed incredibly dedicated to ArenaNet, the company that makes the game. And I'd never quite seen a group of players so intertwined with a developer, so beloved of a developer. And I was seeing all these things that people were saying that, oh, Guild Wars 2 is going to be a game changer. Guild Wars 2 is going to completely change the way we think about MMORPGs. Guild Wars 2 is going to... They're just going to completely redefine the genre. I'm going to be playing Guild Wars 2 and Guild Wars 2 only for years and years and years and years. All these other MMOs are just going to they're just going to feel completely old and outdated, and I'm not going to want to play them anymore. And I just thought for a second, I don't. On what basis do you make that statement? Why do you seem to think that Guild Wars 2, being the sequel to a game that really wasn't even an MMORPG in the truest sense, why do you think that Guild Wars 2 is going to be the game that occupies your time for months, if not years on end? Why do you think that? On what justification do you have to think that? And I started to look into it. Again, I started, and they were saying a lot of things that kind of raised a red flag with me. One, there's no subscription fee. With there being no subscription fee, for one, they're not going to be interested in player retention. Why? Because they have no reason to retain players. As long as they sell their boxes, and as long as they keep selling more boxes when they come out with paid expansions, they don't really need to keep people playing. I mean, unless you want to count the amount of money they are going to make in the cash shop. And I don't even know how much money they're going to make in the cash shop, considering we hope this game never becomes pay to win. So with that said, I'm already a little bit apprehensive as far as Guild Wars 2 as a viable long-term game is concerned. And again, I think that's what when people talk about the next big thing in MMOs, that's what they want. They don't want a game that they can just play a couple of months and quit. I mean, that's what everybody did. That's what everybody did with Rift. That's what everybody did with the Old Republic. They want a new World of Warcraft. People played World of Warcraft and still do for years and years, and no other MMO has been released since then that really captured that same sense of longevity. And so I started, I started researching into Guild Wars 2, and they said, okay, well, we're not going to charge any subscription fee. And then all of a sudden you had all these fanboys saying, oh, ArenaNet, they're being so honest. All these other MMO developers, Blizzard, BioWare, Tryon World, they're all just trying to rip us off, you know. But no, in reality, they're really not trying to rip you off. I don't think. In reality, these games are, again, they're interested in retaining players. They're going to be adding content to keep you playing. Guild Wars 2, not so much, and we're going to get to that. But my next point is also is that in terms of in-game content, ArenaNet basically adopted the, I'm going to call this a marketing mantra or marketing phrase or scheme, whatever you want to call it, of, oh, the whole entire game is in-game. You know, there is no grind to the level cap and hit the end game and then you grind and grind and grind and grind and grind. We don't want you to feel like you're forced to log in. We want you to play for fun. And okay, well, here's the thing. Okay, again, I'm all for games that want to do something a little different than raiding. I like raiding, but I only tend to do it in the summertime when I'm not in school, because that's when I have the most time, and during school hours I really can't devote 3 and 4 hours, 4 or 5 days a week every week to raiding. I just can't. As much as I love raiding, I can't do that. And even if I wasn't in school, I couldn't imagine raiding like that every day for months and years on end. It would just get incredibly monotonous and boring. So I applaud games that try to do something a little different than the general raid grind, but I don't think the answer is just to do away with raiding and then not put anything in its place. You see, these item grinds that ArenaNet seems to be so against, they exist for a reason. They exist to keep people. They exist because they have sort of an addictive quality. You know, you always want to play in the game, so you might get that chance to get that one item that you just haven't gotten yet, and you want to keep playing, and boy, you feel good when you get it. And that's not always a bad thing. I mean, you have to sort of, it's sort of a balancing act. You have to have a grind. I mean, again, to keep players interested in playing your game, but at the same time, you don't want to make the grind feel so hopelessly long and drawn out that players are just going to be playing for days and weeks on end, never getting anywhere. You sort of have to draw a balance. You have to make sure that players are feeling like they're progressing, but at the same time rewarding them for their progression. Guild Wars 2 takes a very interesting stance when it comes to reward and progression. It feels Guild Wars 2's ArenaNet's entire mantra for Guild Wars 2 is basically play because it's fun. And a lot of Guild Wars 2 fans, and a lot of Guild Wars 2 fans and others say, well, or in just common sense might say, well, gee, I mean, isn't that why we all play video games? To play for fun? I mean, because all video games are fun, right? Well, yeah, I agree, but sometimes there are things that are in addition to the actual gameplay that make a game fun. What I mean by that, for one, is that you can play a game for years and years and years, and it may not necessarily take you a very long period of time to get bored with the game mechanics themselves, but there are other extrinsic reasons why you keep playing the game, such as, again, the item grind, constantly getting new items, progressing your character, or maybe you're just playing because you have made some friends in the game and you enjoy playing with your friends. But sort of the game being new and fun kind of dies out after a while, almost no matter what you're playing. And in addition to that, you look at a game like Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII is largely regarded as one of the greatest JRPGs of all time. Yet if you stripped away the storyline, if you stripped away the cutscenes that were at one time absolutely state-of-the-art, and you stripped away the amazing soundtrack, you stripped away all that extrinsic stuff to the actual game, how much fun would Final Fantasy VII actually be? If you just left it on its gameplay alone, which gameplay being, of course, running around in an overworld map, visiting towns, leveling up your character, and fighting monsters. If that was all you did in Final Fantasy VII, would it be as memorable of a game? Would it be as critically acclaimed as it is today? I don't think so. And of course, you're looking at me right now and you're saying, well, what are you getting at? I don't understand you. I mean, Guild Wars 2 has a story. And I agree, it does have a story. Now, I don't think that story is a particularly good story. I think it's very monotonous and boring. And I don't even I thought the storyline in the Old Republic was mediocre, and I think the storyline in Guild Wars 2 is even worse. I would not recommend you buy Guild Wars 2 based on the personal story alone. And I think again, ArenaNet says one of the things that you can do when you hit the level cap is, oh, you can re-roll another character. Isn't that amazing? And you can have a completely different experience re-rolling another character. No, your personal story missions happen once every couple of levels. They don't every bit of almost every bit of major interaction you have with an NPC takes place in these weird little cutscenes where it's like the background is sort of this picture, this painting, and all you can see is your character models just standing there in just very bored looking position talking with one another. It doesn't draw you into the story at all. It doesn't provide any emotional context, and it's just not that interesting. But beyond that, again, I'm not necessarily talking about the story. Let's look at it from the perspective of other MMOs. Like, let's look at it from the perspective of EverQuest, because really, MMOs after the release of Diablo and Diablo 2 sort of shifted in focus from being all about creating virtual worlds that players could sort of live out another life in, like in Ultima Online, to being about, basically item collection, like EverQuest was all about the gear grind and the level grind and progressing your character. That is the fun part of these games. That was always the fun part of a Diablo clone. And it's always been the fun part of EverQuest. It's been the fun part of World of Warcraft, is the item collection, constantly getting new gear for your character and becoming more and more powerful. That's the fun part of the game. It's fun for people. And Guild Wars 2 says, well, no, that's not fun. What is fun is just playing the game, running our dynamic events, running our explorable mode dungeons. You don't need fancy gear upgrades. You don't need new abilities every time you level up. You just need to play the game. And that just doesn't really work for me. And again, you may feel differently, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and put my money on this. I think I have a pretty good idea of how the mainstream gamer feels about these sort of things, and I'm telling you right now, especially if a WoW player, your average WoW player, he's gonna play Guild Wars 2, and he's gonna be like, okay, where's my gear? And you're gonna say, oh, well, in Guild Wars 2, gear's not that important. You do quests you do dynamic events because they're fun. I mean, he's going to think that is hilarious, and as he rightly should, because again, there has to be some sort of a hook. You have to give players a reason to continue doing these things. If you don't, the game just eventually feels sort of pointless. And that's my problem with Guild Wars 2, is the whole game feels, after a while, the whole game just feels kind of pointless. You wonder why you're playing, just what you're doing and what this is even leading to. And again, let me elaborate on that and just say that Guild Wars 2's progression, as if you watched my other video, you should already know, or just if you know anything about Guild Wars 2, you know that there's not a traditional questing system as we know it from games like WoW. No. You just kind of go from zone to zone. Yes, you are given some sort of direction. Your personal story quest generally always leads you sort of in the direction that you need to go for level appropriate content. And you run around and you see all these dynamic events that just sort of pop up in the game world. Yes, they're a lot like rifts actually, and they're a lot like Warhammer Online's public quests. And you can do those, and there's also heart quests. Let me open my map here and show you guys. Alright, you see there's a heart right here and that I haven't done, and there's another one that I haven't done, but over here I've done most every heart. I don't know how much detail you could see on this map in the tiny YouTube screen, but I've done almost every heart in the Brisbane Wildlands area, and they function most like your traditional quests. Actually, they function like every traditional quest in an MMO rolled up into one quest. Like, you can see, well, you probably can't see, but let me read it to you. I have a heart quest right now. It says, help battle the centaurs, disarm their traps, and repair the damage from their assaults. Now the neat thing about this is it's static, meaning that it's always going to be there. It's not a dynamic event. But it's not like a quest that's in some kind of a quest journal. No, there's really not a quest journal in Guild Wars 2. The way it works is that you have to be in a certain area, and the heart quest will pop up on your top right of your screen. And as long as you keep killing mobs and fulfilling your progress, the progress bar will fill up. But if you move further away, the quest will disappear, but you don't actually lose your progress. When you come back to the area, the game has saved your progress so you can continue on with the quest. Now, the criticism I have with this is they tend to take too long. And they do feel very grindy. Again, it's like every generic boring quest in an MMO all rolled up into one. It's a massive kill, collect, and click quest. That's pretty much every heart quest that I've encountered in a nutshell. And dynamic events, too. Dynamic events, again, I was skeptical about the dynamic events. I knew how rifts worked in Rift. I knew how public quest worked in Warhammer. And they were fun the first few times you did them, and then it was just like repeating the same content over and over and over and over and over again, and it got very boring and repetitive. But Guild Wars 2 and a lot of its more vocal fanboys were saying, "Oh, but it's going to be so different. There are thousands and thousands of dynamic events out there, and it's you're going to be able to go through the game and only see one dynamic event or so at a time. It's going to be every time you step into a zone, it's going to be a completely new experience." And then boy, let me tell you, in the beta weekend, I think, and I said this in my beta weekend video, I think I escorted the same damn animal about 7 times. I think I rescued this farmer's field from a bandit attack about 5 times, and the dynamic events just keep respawning and respawning, and eventually you get an idea. You're like, okay, these dynamic events happen in this area. So if I'm looking for something to do, I go back to this area, and I can find that same dynamic event. So then it becomes a matter of just repeating the same content over and over and over again. And then, of course, the common response to that being, "Oh, well, you're not playing the game right. If you're running out of content, you're not playing the game right. I've been playing Guild Wars 2 for 96 hours, and I'm only level 20, and I'm still in the level 5 area." Okay, I grant you this. If you do everything, in other words, if you mine every crafting node, if you visit every teleport or waypoint, if you visit every point of interest, if you complete every jumping puzzle, more on the jumping puzzles in a second, in addition to doing all the hearts and all the dynamic events, then yes, and you do some crafting along the way, then yes, you might actually have enough content. But what about the people that don't care about crafting? What about the people that don't really care about the jumping puzzles? I mean, what kind of a feature is that anyway? A jumping puzzle? Are you serious? Like I can imagine telling some of my friends that play World of Warcraft that are pretty hardcore raiders. I can only imagine them saying, "Oh, hey, in Guild Wars 2, there's no raids, but there's jumping puzzles." I mean, it would just they would bust out laughing. It's ludicrous. It's a silly to even really consider that content. I mean, and especially considering how easy it would be for virtually any MMO to implement a so-called jumping puzzle. And in fact, other MMOs sort of do that with, like, for example, Star Wars: The Old Republic. Definitely, some of their datacrons that you can collect are definitely in some hard-to-reach places, which you can sort of compare to a jumping puzzle. And again, that's sort of what I want to say eventually, is that so many of Guild Wars 2's best features are actually features that can be implemented in virtually any other MMO. But I'll save that for just a minute. But really, what I'm trying to say here now is that to really play Guild Wars 2 the way it's meant to be played, ArenaNet, gives you the illusion of choice, but you really don't have that much choice. You have to do everything. You have to be a jack of all trades. You can't focus on only doing dynamic events or only doing heart quests or only doing hearts and dynamic events. You'll run out of content and you'll be forced to do as I have done and go to other races, low-level areas, and complete the dynamic events and heart quests there. And so then it almost always becomes a game of just you're thinking, man, what do I do? Where do I go? And contrary to a lot of hardcore MMO players, I don't believe it's ever a good thing for for a player at any point in time to think, oh gee, what do I do now? Where do I go? What content should I complete now? That's not a good thing. And I say that for this reason. I say that because, well, first of all, I'm not even talking about having just one linear path. I hate linearity in MMOs, believe it or not. Me, after saying what I just said, I'm now telling you I hate linearity in MMORPGs. So I don't really consider, again, knowing what you're supposed to do at all times to be synonymous with linearity. Linearity basically means if I open up my map here, and this is just an example, Guild Wars 2 actually does a very good job of giving players a wide variety of areas to level in, but say if I had one leveling path from here's Divinity's Reach over here, if I had one leveling path from here all the way down here, basically to where I'm at right now, if that was the only leveling path for every character, every class, every race, from levels 1 through 25 or so, that's linearity to me. But it's not linear if I have choices of where I want to go. If I have multiple areas in which I can do the same kinds of content, that's a lot of choice to me. And I like that. But I don't like how, again, in Guild Wars 2, you always have this sense of, gee, I really want to level up, but I just completed this dynamic event, and I don't see another one in the area, and I don't know where any more hearts are. What do I do? Where do I go? And so a lot of your time in Guild Wars 2, I think for most people, again, you're just going to kind of walk around aimlessly wondering, gee, where do I go? What do I do? I don't know what I'm doing. I just wish I had, again, I just wish I had a quest that could show me, where to go, and so then I would know what to do, and I could feel like I'm actually progressing through these areas instead of running around like a chicken with his head cut off for no apparent reason. And also, when you finish these dynamic events and quests and heart quests, you know how I mentioned earlier that gear is not such an important factor in Guild Wars 2? Well, you aren't automatically rewarded with items for completing dynamic events or hearts. You're awarded karma points. And these karma points can then be used to spend on armor and weapons from vendors, which most of the vendors that you'll deal with after completing a heart quest will be right there because they're the hearts. When you see a heart on your minimap, that's actually an NPC who's going to reward you with a selection of goods which you can buy from them, which sort of seems silly to me. It seems like a step backwards. I mean, in World of Warcraft, you do something and you get a reward. You don't do something and then which gives you the ability to purchase a reward. You actually get rewarded. And I think that's the best way to go about it. And then, of course, just to say, this is my character. I'm kind of in a bad spot. Whoa! I'm kind of in a bad spot here. I should have picked a better time to show you this, but this is my character. See how he looks right here? Other than some experimentation I've done with armor dyes, he's looked the exact same since level 1, and he's level 25 right now. And so again, that just goes to there's not a lot of armor variety in the game at all. And again, I don't know if the armor variety comes later on in game, or if maybe it's all sort of going to be in related to the cash shop, like maybe the good looking gear comes from the cash shop. But it does feel kind of cheap that it's like I don't really feel like I'm getting much reward for doing these quests, other than yes, I'm getting some better stat bonuses, but I don't look any different. I don't look more powerful than I did before. I don't get any new cool looking gear. There's basically 3 choices of gear that I do have. And other than those 3 choices of gear, again, there might be some rare stuff out there, But for the most part, everyone is going to look exactly the same, which again lends credence to me saying that Guild Wars 2 is very much the sequel to Guild Wars 1, where most people who leveled up also looked nearly exactly the same. So there's not a lot of armor variety. Why? Because it doesn't have the same depth. Again, this is not a game that you're going to be playing for months and years at a time because it simply doesn't have the same depth, and that's another reason why they're not charging you a monthly fee. ArenaNet does not intend, has never intended for you to play Guild Wars 2 and only Guild Wars 2 for years and years at a time, and if that's what you think you're going to do, which by the way a lot of people do, again you're going to be sorely disappointed. And like I said before, the end game, if there even is one, basically just consists of you grinding high-level dynamic events in this zone called Ore, which you can get these items, which then you can use at this mystical forge thingy, which you can go and create more unique-looking items and armor skins. Again, the skins. So I guess okay, that's where the cool armor comes in, and you have to get to the end game before you can get any of the cool stuff. Which, again, I'm sort of apathetic towards that whole deal. But now I'll talk about the character progression. Guild Wars 2 has sort of an interesting take on character progression, and to me, it seems sort of inspired by a MOBA, sort of like a League of Legends type game. Again, not that I'm saying that Guild Wars 2 has anything to relate, feels like a MOBA, because it doesn't. I'm just talking about like your character feels like a ready-made packaged character. For the most part, if you look down at my skill bar, again, I don't know on what detail you can actually see, but if you look down at my skill bar, I have 5 main abilities. And these 5 main abilities are basically given to me at level 1. However, I only have access to 1 or 2 when I first equip a weapon. I have to use a certain weapon for a number of attacks before I get access to all my skills. And then once I have access to all my skills, that's pretty much the only weapon skills that I actually get. The only new abilities you get, if you press the H key, you can go down here and take a look at skills and traits. It's sort of a semblance of a skill tree here. And again, I guess I've been pretty lazy. I haven't fully filled mine out yet, but you can just kind of see some of the stuff here which you can buy, and it's mostly traps and buffs and some DOT things and just sort of extraneous skills and abilities. So again, you don't really get a sense in a visual sense that your character is becoming stronger, and you don't really get a sense in terms of abilities that your character is getting stronger. And with the level scaling, which again is this thing, and I understand why ArenaNet did this. Guild Wars 2 is a game that's going to live and die based off its dynamic events. And they wanted to make sure that they didn't, months down the road, they don't have a bunch of level 80s going into these low-level areas and just face-rolling all the dynamic events. They wanted to keep the game competitive and fun for all the new players. And so, the game has forced level scaling. Now, again, I don't consider that a negative personally, because again, I think normally I would say it's negative, but in Guild Wars 2 is an exception to that rule because of the reasons I just mentioned. So yeah, but I do think that some people are not going to like that. Some people again like to feel more powerful, and one way in which they do so is going into low-level zones and just killing things for a few minutes just to test out their character, or just for kicks. Well, in Guild Wars 2, can't really do that. So now, I just want to talk about some things that I do like about Guild Wars 2, because yes, I did say that I sort of had a love-hate relationship with Guild Wars 2. I did say that. So, what I like about Guild Wars 2, what it does really well, while I can't say that it does a bang-up job of getting people together in a coordinated fashion, at least it sort of gets people together. Anytime there's a dynamic event, people just automatically swarm to it. Anytime there's a heart quest, people are going to swarm to it. And what happens is, there's no real mob tagging in Guild Wars 2. So if you see a character attacking a mob or looting something, you can run up and attack the mob or loot the mob as well, and you can get credit even though you didn't attack the mob first. I think this is wonderful. And so as a result, you see a lot of people helping each other, rezzing each other, attacking other people's monsters, and it's a beautiful thing. We're not grouped. It's not forced grouping like in EverQuest. We need to get away from that. I agree. It's not forced grouping. You're not even really in a group. You're just around other people, and you are cooperating with other people, and not in a very organized fashion, a sort of very chaotic fashion. But again, it's very fun, and it seems to be something extremely simple. Even if your game doesn't revolve around dynamic events or hearts, and it has a traditional questing system, there's no reason why MMOs released after Guild Wars 2 shouldn't do away with the mob tagging system entirely. Let everyone help everyone in any way possible. Don't try to regulate who gets the mob first and who doesn't, and things of that nature. And again, I like the dynamic events. I do. I think they're fun. Mindless fun. They don't really seem to have a lot of depth, but again, they're fun. And again, I think that other MMOs should do more to implement dynamic events. I don't see why you can't have a game that puts such an emphasis on dynamic events, but also has more traditional questing. Because traditional questing, I don't think this dynamic event system has totally done away with the traditional questing model for most MMOs. And I say that because, again, there's just not enough variety in the questing. It feels more organic. But like in a recent parody video I was watching, you'll run across so many things that happen, dynamically and unexpectedly. And then 10 minutes later, you'll run across it again. And 10 minutes later, you'll run across it again and again and again and again. And it almost does the opposite of what it's intended to do. When you see the same things happening over and over and over and over and over again, it almost does the opposite of immersing you into the game world. Instead, it actually takes you out of the game world and reminds you that you are playing a video game, and the objective of this video game is just to run around in the map, just run around all these maps and kill things. Because that's pretty much what you do in PvE content in Guild Wars 2. You just run around the map and you kill things. You kill things for a heart quest, you kill things for dynamic events, and you don't even make a constant progression half the time. Again, you just kind of run around the map hoping to find something to kill. And the dynamic events, I was told that when you get to higher levels, they occur more often and they're more unique. I don't really think so. Again, it's mostly just killing waves of mobs, which, again, is fun. It's good, mindless fun for a short period of time. But I think people are going to tire of that after a while. I really do. I think the greater gaming populace is going to get tired of that, and they're going to go back to WoW or go back to the Old Republic or Rift or whatever game that they're playing, and they're going to be talking about the next big thing to come out, whether it's the Elder Scrolls Online, whether it's Final Fantasy XIV Reborn or whatever that game was called, whatever it is. I just don't think that Guild Wars 2 is going to have the longevity that most, well, I hesitate to say most, that a lot of people are hoping it's going to have. That's not to say, again, that I don't have fun playing Guild Wars 2. I mean, I do. I don't play it that often because I'm so busy. But when I do get a chance to play it, again, I generally have a fun time. But I get bored pretty quick. I play for a couple hours a day, maybe 1 hour a day, maybe not even at all. Maybe I skip a day or two and then play an hour or two. So I don't really get in a lot of time. But again, it's just sort of, it does get boring pretty quick because I find myself doing the same things, and I don't feel like the game does a very good job of providing me with a goal in mind. I don't feel excited about leveling up, about seeing a new area, because it's all just kind of the same stuff. It's not that fun to me, and again, the game world, while easy on the eyes, while nice looking, and while it provides several decent looking vistas, is not as imaginative as in some games. For example, it's not really as imaginative as a World of Warcraft or as a Terra Online. So it's not as much in Terra. and this is getting real nitpicky, I know, but in Terra there was a huge. I really enjoyed leveling up, or not just leveling up, but I really enjoyed reaching a new area in the game because it was always fun to see just what kind of really cool looking location I was going to be put in next. With Guild Wars 2, it's just kind of a forest, a bigger forest, a snowy area, a really jungly area. And those areas look nice, but again, I don't feel as excited to move from area to area as I did playing other games. So there you have it. I've pretty much said my piece here. But that in a nutshell, that's why I think that Guild Wars 2 isn't really the second coming of an MMO that most people seem to think it is. It lacks depth. It's very chaotic and sort of Zerg reliant. It's fun and chaotic short bursts, but it just doesn't provide with the same depth of content and breadth of content as a pay-to-play MMO, of course, unless you count things like world completion, jumping puzzles, and things of that nature as actual content, which I really do not. Simply because, again, there are jumping puzzles in, say, the Old Republic, but nobody really mentions them as actual content. There are completion achievements in WoW, but nobody really mentions them as actual content. When people refer to content, they always talk about 90% of the time, they always talk about end-game, what's at the end game. And in Guild Wars 2, I'm just not seeing it. ArenaNet basically says, our end game consists of explorable mode dungeons, which that is, if you have a good guild, that's probably your best bet. Again, you're not going to be grinding for items. Well, you are going to be grinding for items in a sense, but it's just going to be appearance gear only. And from what I hear, it's a pretty nasty grind as it is. You're going to have to run these explorable mode dungeons plenty of times before you're able to afford an armor piece. And I think that'll eventually get changed. But again, you have explorable mode dungeons as one option for end game, and then going to ore and then running these these more high level and more intense dynamic events over and over and over again for, again, special items, or of course re-rolling a new character and experiencing a new personal story. It sounds like a lot, and I think that's a lot of people are going to say it's a lot, but for a lot of people, again, I don't consider re-rolling a character to be added content. BioWare tried to do that with the Old Republic and through the Legacy system, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous to consider re-rolling another character to be considered content in a game. When you re-roll, it's because you ran out of content, not because re-rolling is actual content. I mean, it's ludicrous to suggest otherwise. And I'm not sure if the explorable mode dungeons and just grinding for items and such is going to hold players' attention. I'm just really, again, I'm not sure of that. And also, I've completely neglected player versus player, and I've done so because I'm not a big fan of player versus player. But I think if you enjoy world v world combat, or if you enjoy the arena-based PvP, you're going to get a lot of mileage out of Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2, I think, was built for someone like you. But if you're someone that really doesn't care for PvP, that just wants to do PvE, I think Guild Wars 2 is going to be a fine game to play for a couple of months, but I wouldn't recommend it for anyone that's looking for a new home or looking for any game to replace WoW. This game has sold a crap ton of copies, but I don't see it, again, I don't see it really expanding much beyond the 2 million point where they're at right now. I think a lot of people, and I know you can just visit, any forum and you're going to have a lot of people that are saying, hey, I'm level 80 already and I'm bored, I have nothing to do, and I quit. And I think that's what you're going to see. A lot of people are going to do that. And they're going to come back, probably, when the next big content update hits, or when another expansion comes out. And they can do that because, again, Guild Wars 2 charges no monthly fee. So if you're going to tell me that Guild Wars 2 is a pretty good game because it charges no monthly fee and it's fun to play in between MMOs, then I'm going to say you're perfectly right, and I agree with you. But if you're going to try to convince me that Guild Wars 2 is any serious competition for World of Warcraft or Rift or any other MMO that really competes for your monthly dollar, I'm going to say nah, not so much. A lot of people kind of intend for that, but from what I've shown you guys, I think people are eventually they're going to be sorely disappointed when they find out that that's not really the target audience ANET had in mind when they created this game. So, well, that's about all I have for you guys this week. Next week, I'm actually thinking about doing, instead of an MMO, I'm actually thinking about doing a classic gameplay impressions video. Not quite sure what I'm going to do yet, but I guess you guys will see Friday. So, thanks, guys. And tell you what, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section below. If you like my videos or you want to see more, please feel free to subscribe. So thanks, guys, and see you next week.